relationship. And at the same time, when you have a romantic relationship and things start going south, nothing can be more painful, the frustration and the arguments. Well, today you're going to learn about the energy of love, and you'll learn how to take this knowledge to improve your own relationship. To lead the way, we are speaking to David Feinstein from EnergyPsychEd.com. David is a clinical psychologist who has served on the faculty of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He is a best-selling author with 8 books to his name, and his most recent book, which he authored with his wife, Donna Eden, is called The Energies of Love and was a New York Times bestseller. Along with his wife, they teach a program on this concept that you can learn more about at mindvalley.com/love. David, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jessica. It's great to be with you again.
Oh, I always love chatting with you. I love the relationship that you and Donna have. I have to start off by asking, why is this a topic that you are so passionate about sharing with us?
Well, Donna and I have been together for 45 years, and she's I kind of married into energy medicine. I didn't come into it on my own steam, but I was already teaching relationship workshops when we met, and she had the idea of bringing energy into that. And so we taught our first relationship workshop about 3 years into our time together. So that was like 42 years ago. And it was a popular class. It wasn't our main thing. It was kind of something we did on the side. And then about 10 years ago or so, our publisher wanted us to do a book on the energies of love. And that kind of made us a little nervous, because we know several couples who work with couples who, when their book came out, their relationship ended.
Right, all that pressure.
Yes, that would be very difficult and embarrassing. We didn't want to tempt the relationship gods, but nonetheless, the publisher was enthused about the book, and so we decided to go ahead with it. And what happened was very interesting, because as soon as we, even agreed that we'd be signing the contract, things started going south for us. And it wasn't because of the book, but it was because we're running an organization together, and we were under a lot of pressure, a lot of tension, and I was the CEO, still am, and I was feeling Donna was getting more and more critical of me, and so I was feeling more and more defensive. And it was we were in a high visibility relationship. A lot of people were seeing our arguments. It was just not, our staff was seeing where we disagreed, and it was not going very well. And I particularly was not holding my space very well. I was getting really easily triggered by her. I was hearing criticism where she was meaning to be constructive. It was at a point, we've had a very loving relationship this whole time, but also very passionate in both the good sense and in the sense at this point I was slamming doors. It was that level of intensity, and we'd get to the point where we could kind of get settled again and get restabled and reconnected, but then we'd go off again really easily. And so one night we were staying in a hotel that had a hot tub, and I had just had it, so I just left and went in the hot tub, and I started to go into the feelings I was having. And I remembered that I asked myself, when's the first time I had a feeling like this? And I went back to first grade. And when I was in first grade, I was bullied quite a bit by one boy in particular, whose name was Pudgy. And Pudgy and I got off at the same bus stop, and he would punch me every day at the end of, as we were parting. We were the only 2 people that got off at that stop. And, but this one particular day, was particularly bad in terms of getting beat up, because that day the teacher was angry with the class, and she told the class, and it was time for a bathroom break. So first grade, all the boys go to line up, all the girls line up, and she said, nobody, if anybody talks, you're going to all have to sit with your heads down for 20 minutes, or if nobody talks, I will read you a story. So that was the bargain. So I'm then in the lavatory, and I'm coming up to the sink at the same time that another boy's coming up to the sink. And I tell him, go ahead. Well, the teacher just happened to look in right at that moment, saw my mouth moving, and that was it. So the whole class had to have their head down for the rest of the day, basically 20 minutes that were left. And even though she didn't say whose fault it was, she said, I'm very surprised by the person who talked. And everybody knew by the end of class. And so I got beat up really bad that day. And that was what was being triggered for me, was this unfairness that I'm doing my best and I'm being criticized. And so as I saw that, I tapped on it, and I tapped on it, every aspect of it, the unfairness of it, the pain of being beat up, all the feelings towards Pudgy through that whole year of being bullied. And it was really, like we all know tapping does, it is very transformative, so that by the end, I not only was no longer triggered by that memory, but instead seeing it as a resource for me of really having more compassion for what can go wrong, and really an affirmation of myself. I was able to then recognize that that is what is coming up whenever Donna is making these constructive suggestions. I'm hearing them in the way that I felt when the whole class had to have their heads down. And so that was one of the times where I really recognized how useful tapping can be in working with couples. I hadn't really done that to that point. I'd used more the psychological techniques that I knew before I learned tapping, and I used Donna's version of energy medicine with couples, but I hadn't really put tapping into it. And so that was my first experience, and it's been, that's a long time now that I've had a lot of experience since then in working with couples, and find it really powerful.
I know we're going to go into this in more depth a little later, but I do want to point out how nothing seems to trigger us more than the people we love, whether it's family or a romantic relationship. They can push our buttons like no other.
It's so true. No, we're actually wired that way, that when because as babies, as infants, we're totally dependent on our caregivers. But then as adults in the wild, you were totally dependent on your community and the people that were close to you. So if there was a rift in the feeling between you, that was a life-threatening event. And so the people we're closest to, when there is that kind of mismatch of energy, it exaggerates, it accelerates very fast. Every couples therapist in the world is familiar with that the simplest little thing, it seems, can have people screaming at one another and at the brink of divorce.
Mm-hmm. So you just shared how it helped in your relationship. Can you share a story about how the work that you and Donna have been doing has been helping other people in their relationships?
Sure. There's a couple who had a really great start to the relationship, but by the end of a year, they were almost over. Their names were Jeremy and Melissa. And Jeremy was 36 when he married Melissa. And for the year before their marriage, they had a wonderful courtship. Melissa had been divorced, and she had a 7-year-old and 9-year-old, both boys. And Jeremy really took to them, and he would take them to baseball games and go to their soccer games, and take them to museums and he just really bonded with them. And so by the time they got married, he had a really strong relationship with them and had stepped into the role of father, which he always wanted to be. And so he kind of inherited this family that was wonderful. Now, Steve was the ex-husband, and Steve had moved to another city after the divorce that was a couple of hours away. And even though he hadn't spent a lot of time with his kids, he did love both boys, and he would regularly come to their city on Sundays for an afternoon visit. So every other week he would be there. And Jeremy hadn't had much contact with Steve during the courtship, but once he was living with the family, Steve became a fixture in his life. So every other Sunday, Steve would drive up, take the boys, and it wasn't a problem. But Steve decided to take the boys for a week to Orlando and to have a Disney adventure. And this was all the boys could talk about for the week before Orlando and the week after. And Jeremy was suddenly feeling like his role with them was being usurped, that Steve was really trying to wreck things. And even though it wasn't rational, it got really, really strong. And it got to the point where he would be kind of questioning the boys after every visit to try and find things that happened that he could criticize to Melissa. He would tell Melissa all the reasons that Steve was responsible for the divorce, and Melissa would be fine with that for a while, but then it would exaggerate and the emotion would get so strong that it was getting weird. And then it escalated so that every other Sunday, Jeremy was in a really bad mood, and it got so tense that it was now polluting every other part of their relationship. Melissa was telling Steve to grow up, or telling Jeremy to grow up, that he was acting like a spoiled brat. And that's where things were when they came for a session. Now, they'd never used tapping. They didn't know anything about energy psychology, really, but they had been referred by another couple that had worked with me. So they had some idea what they were getting into. And I asked Jeremy to talk about why he was there. And he had some sense that he was overreacting. But he really believed that Steve was evil. He really believed that Steve was trying to wreck their marriage, that Steve must be jealous of them. And he wasn't really interested in being persuaded of any other take on it than that. But he was interested in having less of an emotional reaction. So that's where we started. So we started to tap on his emotional response. And the scene that we rated was on a Sunday as Steve's car is driving up, his feelings, his emotions as that was happening. So that went down a bit, but it went down to a 7 and we couldn't get it lower. So as typically you might do, I asked Steve to describe what was keeping it at a 7. And he described a heaviness in his chest and a tightness in his throat. And I asked him to explore the tightness in his throat. And he said, well, it's like I'm holding back tears. And now, when you get to this point with a couple, you can pretty well guess that just like it, for me, going back to first grade was a critical piece of unraveling what was going on, I made a guess that there was something in Jeremy's past that was playing into the current situation. So I asked Jeremy to go into that feeling of holding back tears and to ride it like a bridge back in time. That's an old hypnosis technique called the affect bridge. You ride it back in time to one of the first times you had that experience. And he went back to a time when he was 10 years old. And he was an only child and very happy, very well adjusted, when his parents, as a favor to a friend, took in a foster boy. And this boy, it was just a temporary arrangement until a permanent placement could be found. But for Jeremy, this was a major event because his parents were busy, they both worked, but he was the only child. He got all their attention when they had time, and suddenly this boy was a problem, and he was getting all the attention. And at 10 years old, Jeremy didn't have an understanding of what was going on. All he knew was that he became second after 10 years as an only child. And so he began to hate this boy, and he began to pick fights with the boy. And Jeremy had never been in trouble before. And so suddenly all these things are happening that are just turning his world upside down. So that's where we went. We went back there with the to tap on all the aspects of it, on what it felt like to not get his parents' attention, how he believed that he must have done something wrong to deserve this, all his anger at this other boy, all the ways that he kept his tears back because he didn't want to cry about the situation. So we tapped on each of those, got all of that down to a zero, every aspect. We really stayed with them. And as you know, a round of tapping only takes a minute or two. So you can do a lot of aspects in very little amount of time. And also with couples, I usually do a double session. So I had 2 hours with them. So we got into really resolving that early experience. And then we went back to the memory of Steve's car driving up to the house. And it had gone down from a 7 to a 3 without having worked on it at all. So then we just did normal tapping things you would do, and it went down really quickly to a 0. So Melissa is watching all this, and she's kind of getting an understanding because she was in shock also that her marriage that started out so wonderfully had gone to such a difficult place in less than a year that she needed to tap on that shock. But it was much easier because she had witnessed what Jeremy had gone through, and she was she had compassion for it, whereas before she was just judging him. So by the end of 2 hours, it seemed like this entire thing had turned around. And I scheduled another session with them 2 weeks later, and sure enough, Jeremy was having no problem with Steve's visits, and the relationship, the lovely relationship they had was just completely on track. And I did follow them. It was like that was the obstacle they had to overcome. And so that's just an example of how this can work.
And it also shows that if they were just getting coaching or therapy on what was happening, that it's not enough. And so when we're trying to improve our relationships, if we're just obsessing about the argument, then doing that might not be enough to really create that transformation, because we have to see where we're having those triggers. So I think that's a big aha moment. And just the invitation, the practice of taking a step back during an argument and asking, what does this remind me of, can be so powerful.
Yes, well, I am very glad you asked that. And I have kind of developed a little slideshow for this talk, and I'm going to share that. And it starts with that very question. What is the basic premise of the energies of love? And what the basic premise is this. Before your bodies touch, your energies meet. Now, what does that mean? Well, Donna sees energy. And so what she sees is that when two people are engaged with one another, their energies are overlapping. And that's not just something that is kind of a momentary, buzz. Their energies carry so much about them. Their energies carry their history. Their energies carry their beliefs. Their energies carry their attachment style. Their energies carry. So it's not just energy in some vague sense. It's a lot of information is there when two energies come together. And the basic premise of the book is that, plus that there's something you can do about it. That if you deal with a relationship difficulty using psychological means, it's true, you can do a lot. But the early research on couples therapy was very discouraging. It didn't keep people from getting divorced. Now there's new approaches to couples therapy that are very effective. The other EFT, which is Susan Johnson's emotional focused therapy, has really good results. But to come in rather than a only psychological way, but to come in and work with the energies goes to the infrastructure of the relationship. And it, in my experience, lets you get there a lot faster. So that's the basic premise. And the book talks about 3 different dimensions of a loving partnership. And we'll talk about where tapping comes in to each of them. One is the inherited aspects of love. One is the learned aspects of love. And one is the mutually created aspects of love. So we're going to look at those one at a time. The inherited aspects of love, this comes from your genetics, and it involves your biochemistry, your gender, your character traits. In addition to your biochemical structure, your energy structure is also inherited. And that particularly plays into your stress response style. Donna can look at an infant, and in that infant's aura, she can see the way that this infant is going to respond to stress. There are different styles. And so, and then because we lived in the same community for a couple of decades, she would then follow these infants into childhood and into adolescence and adulthood, and her predictions were always right. So because she could see it. So there are things that are just built in, they're inherited, they're biological, they're energetic. The second is the learned aspects of love. And you get this from your parents, your caregiver, and the other authorities in your life, the models they show you of how to love, of how to fight, of how to soothe yourself, how to soothe another. And your attachment style, whether you tend to be someone that clings or someone that withdraws, there's a whole science of attachment that comes from the models that the people that matter to you provide. But in addition to those models, there are the culture's images, which you get from the media, from movies, from the news, from your childhood readers, from school. You get cultural images of attractiveness. What is attractiveness? Who should I be attracted to? Now, some of that is biological, it's built in, but some of it is learned. Cultural images of romance, cultural images of commitment. Is this a forever relationship? Is this something I take kind of casually? Is this something where I go out and conquer as many different people as I can? What is the messages that the culture gives? And the culture often gives different messages to men than it gives to women. And what is a long-term partnership? What does it mean to really merge your life with another person? So the first dimension of love is the inherited aspects. The second is the learned aspects. And the third is the mutually created aspects of love. And these involve shared activities, how you manage your differences, your sexual relations, the ways you align your values, what we call conscious partnering, and being on a shared spiritual journey. These are all things that are part of the mutually created aspects of love. And where do the other two fit in? Well, the inherited aspects of love, you bring this into the relationship. And the learned aspects of love, you also bring this into your relationship. So where does tapping fit in? Okay, well, tapping fits into each of these areas. Now, the inherited aspects of love, what you can do is somewhat limited, because some inherited differences can't be changed. You can't make your partner like what you like. You can't make your partner think like you think. You can't make your partner see as you see. You can't make your partner feel as you feel. Now, this might seem obvious, but in the heat of argument, you're trying to do those things. Most people are. But acupoint tapping does give us the capacity to counteract dysfunctional remnants of our prehistoric past. Hitting each other over the head with clubs may not be perfect, but it's the best system anybody's come up with so far. So that's silly, but tapping can, to a degree, moderate these prehistoric remnants that really do play out in us in very real ways. The fight, flight, freeze response, negativity bias, that is, we have inherited from the past to be on the lookout for what is wrong, because that had survival value. It was a lot more important to smell whether there was a tiger nearby than to pick the tastiest berries. So we really have that negativity bias in ways that we don't need anymore. And there's also comparison appraisals. When you're in the wild and your siblings are either going to get more resources, more food than you or less, you really are you're comparing yourself to them. You're comparing yourself to others for mate selection. So you have all this is really in your genes, but you can also do things to overcome it. You can do things because these are all in the limbic system, and you also have a prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, that is able to moderate these, and tapping can really be used to help with that. So in terms of the inherited aspects of love, can tapping help with that? Yes, it can. It can help you to stay on the high road versus the low road. But as you work with these issues, you really need to recognize that these are really built in. These are not easy to change, so that you are coming at them with a real compassion for how strong they are operating in the individual, even as you're helping the person to find the high road. So tapping also, as we saw even with the case example and with myself, the learned aspects of love, it can help, and also the mutually created aspects of love. And so we'll go into 7 skill zones for tapping into better relationships. And these include learning how to move through emotional intensity without escalating, how to defuse triggers, how to trace current challenges to formative child experiences, you saw that, how to heal old wounds, how to change lifelong patterns that trace to those wounds, how to complete other unfinished business, and how to establish a vision of how you want yourself or your relationship to change, and to rewire your brain to support that vision. So I'll take those one at a time. So working through emotional intensity without escalating. That's a great strength of tapping because it has a great ability to reduce emotional arousal. It sends deactivating signals straight to the amygdala. And there's brain imaging studies that show how this works. So it really lets you get a handle on that emotional intensity. And it's not only grabbing it, it's also reducing the size of that lightning bolt. It's reducing it by the tapping. And so what couples can do in this first skill set is they can recognize that when either one of you is getting hooked, is getting triggered, that you can immediately stop and begin tapping. Trouble is that it's exactly when you're getting hooked that you're least likely to have it occur to you to do something constructive. Because as we talked about before, there's a whole survival set of impulses that comes on at those times. And we just want to push forward, show that we're right, and get confirmed and affirmed by our partner rather than to do something that is constructive. So often you don't stop to tap. Now, a way to work with this is called tapping while talking, tapping while listening, where if you know you're talking about something that's loaded, you just do the tapping during the conversation. And the first time Donna and I did that, it worked really well. She had made some plans that she had to decide on before she could consult with me, and she knew I wasn't going to like it. And so she was explaining it, and we just tapped along. And what happened for me was I felt less reactive, and she felt she was able to describe what happened without assuming I was going to be judging her. So it really calmed things down. However, next time we tried it, we found out that there's a caveat that if you're doing it on a really loaded issue instead of kind of a day-to-day concern, that what the tapping does is it just kind of lets you go to another layer of the issue, another layer, without resolving any of them. So you're unpeeling the layers of the onion without dealing with the layers of the onion. So it made things get much worse. So if you try the tapping while talking, tapping while listening technique, and it makes things worse, stop right away and begin to tap on what has come up. Now, as it turns out, most communication techniques that couples therapists used to use don't work. You know, the empathic listening, it works great if you're not triggered. But when you are triggered, it isn't worth much because you can't go there. You can't be empathic when you're triggered. So we came up with what we call the STAR Pact. And the STAR Pact starts with the hardest thing, which is to stop. That is why we have it as a pact, because you're not going to stop right in the heat of the moment unless you have an ironclad agreement with each other that when either of you calls STAR Pact, that you both have agreed that you're going to shift your attention. So the first thing is to stop. The second thing is to tap. And that is for you personally and your partner personally to tap on whatever feelings have come up. And well, the way we teach it, it's not just to tap. Donna has a whole series of energy medicine exercises that a couple can use or an individual can use within this couple's pact to de-escalate their feelings. And so it might be tapping, but it also might be holding the neurovascular points, or it might be doing something with triple warmer. So you can see on YouTube her daily energy routine. And those are the techniques. Those 7 or 8 techniques are what we teach couples to do in this second part so that they are regulating their nervous system. Because continuing the discussion is really not the most constructive step at this point. But regulating your emotional response is. So the third step is to attune. And that involves aligning yourself energetically with your partner. So how do you do that? You can do energy exercises with each other, or you can tap with each other. Now, energy exercises, our favorite one at this point is to do what's called a spinal flush, where one of you lies down and the other just presses the points along the spine. And it feels great, and it's just a caring way to channel your emotion. But you can also tap together on what, because on the T part, you're doing it alone. Here, you're doing it together. Other things you can do to attune are simply take a walk, get in a hot tub together, do something that really relaxes you together. And then also in this attune part, once you've really attuned yourself to one another, you can then start to think about the argument you've been having once again. But this time, a way to do it is to really move into the space of your partner and imagine them as a child, innocent, undefended. Just see them as a child. And from that space, begin to empathize with their position, with what they're saying, what you disagree with. And then write it down. Write down as if you were them, their position. And that brings to the fourth part, which is to engage one another about the issue again. And first thing you do is you read what you wrote. And then you ask them, did I understand you? And their first response is to let you know that they appreciate your effort. So then from there, the more traditional types of communication techniques are going to start to work to really resolve even really tough problems, even problems that have been tripping you up for years. If you bring these steps to it, it allows it to work. And whenever either of you is hooked, you simply tap on it. So you're really paying attention to your emotional responses. But techniques that are from traditional communication methods that will work now are things like, do you mean? Just asking, do you mean, and getting several yes responses. So that's the STAR pack. So those are ways of really moving through the intensity without escalating. You can simply stop and tap. You can tap along with the conversation, or you can really go through all these more complex steps, but it's worth it because it's these kinds of arguments that really shape the relationship. Whether you resolve them, whether you don't resolve them, they'll just kind of keep on coming back. So the second skill set is to defuse triggers. And in the first, you're doing it in the moment. Okay, you have a first aid technique, something to do right now. Here, you're looking at patterns. Is there something that triggers you consistently in your partner? So let's do a tapping on that, everybody. So first thing I'd like you to do is think about a trigger, something your partner does or any other relationship you're in, something that really triggers you, like maybe your partner has a certain expression that really gets you, or a facial expression, or maybe they start to criticize you, and that's your trigger. Or maybe it's something that has nothing to do with you. You see them messing up the room, or criticizing your kid, or anything that really triggers you, okay? So take a moment to really find a trigger. And imagine a situation where you can be or have been triggered by this particular cue, and give it a rating of 0 to 10, typical SUD rating. How much distress do you feel in your mind body as you experience this? Now, I like to rub on chest sore spots instead of the side of the hand point, but whichever you prefer for the setup statement. So even though I really get triggered, do this along with me. Even though I really get triggered by this situation,
even though I really get triggered by this situation,
I deeply love and accept myself.
I deeply love and accept myself.
Twice more. Even though I really get triggered by this situation,
even though I really get triggered by this situation,
I deeply love and accept myself.
I deeply love and accept myself.
Even though I really get triggered by this situation,
even though I really get triggered by this situation,
I deeply love and accept myself.
I deeply love and accept myself.
This is so upsetting.
This is so upsetting.
I can't believe it's happening again.
I can't believe it's happening again.
I've given really kind feedback.
I've given really kind feedback.
And here it is again.
And here it is again.
And I'm so upset by it.
And I'm so upset by it.
I really don't like this.
I really don't like this.
By the way, I may be doing, many tappers use different points. So I'm no doubt using some points that are different than what you're used to. So you can use the points I use or use the points you're used to. There it is again.
There it is again.
It's part of my life.
It's part of my life.
I don't want it to be.
I don't want it to be.
So this is so frustrating.
This is so frustrating.
And I can't make it stop.
And I can't make it stop.
And I feel uncared about.
And I feel uncared about.
Now we're going to do the 9 gamut. Close your eyes. Open them and look down to the right. Down to the left. Circle in one direction. Circle your eyes in the other direction. Hum. Count slowly to 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And hum again. And back to the tapping. Am I ever going to get over this?
Am I ever going to get over this?
I can't get them to stop.
I can't get them to stop.
I so want them to stop.
I so want them to stop.
I wish I didn't feel so strongly about it.
I wish I didn't feel so strongly about it.
Since they're not stopping.
Since they're not stopping.
Maybe I can relax.
Maybe I can relax.
Maybe I can feel a little bit less triggered.
Maybe I can feel a little bit less triggered.
I'm sending signals to my limbic system right now.
I'm sending signals to my limbic system right now.
As I see the situation.
As I see the situation.
And tap on it.
And tap on it.
My whole brain is relaxing.
My whole brain is relaxing.
This still matters.
This still matters.
But doesn't matter as much.
But it doesn't matter as much.
I'm getting free.
I'm getting free.
Doesn't help to get upset.
It doesn't help to get upset.
Not in this situation.
Not in this situation.
Take a breath. Okay. Now go back to the original situation, the trigger, and see if it's gone down 1 or 2 or more on the SUD scale.
So David, I'm sure that there are people who want to know where these other points that you're tapping on are. we've learned the basic 9. You also did some humming and some counting. So can you explain that strategy, that part of tapping?
Right. Many years ago, Donna and I wrote a book with Gary Craig called The Promise of Energy Psychology. And in it, we used the basic EFT tapping points, but Donna had a few points that she liked to put in. So it was kind of a combination. So that's what we still use. So what you're familiar with is the points that are on the inside of the eyebrows, the points that are outside of the eyes, the points that are under the eyes, the points that are under the nose, the points that are above the chin, the K27 points. Okay, then Donna likes to use the heart, to tap on the heart chakra. And then.
So is that like right in between your breasts?
And that's right. Yes, right
well,
there.
Not your breasts, but my breasts.
And then the side of the body, your spleen points. Then we tap on the points that are on the seam of your pants between your knee and your hip. So right in the middle there on the seam of pants. Then we do the side of the hands. I like to do the entire length of the hands. And then the triple warmer point, that's between the little finger and ring finger on the ridge there, and I do it with 4 fingers. So those are the basic tapping points. And the eye roll, that was part of what's called the 9 gamut. That goes back to thought field therapy. And for a while, it was part of EFT. And I find that as a really good way to integrate the work. So it gets the right and left brains talking to one another.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So yeah, let's keep going. So we just did some tapping on the triggers, and what's next?
Okay. So you defuse the triggers, and hopefully you got a sense of at least a little bit less intensity. Now you probably have to go through it a number of times to really get it down to 0 and follow aspects. The third is to trace the current challenges to formative childhood experiences. You saw how we did that with myself and also with Jeremy. The fourth is to heal old wounds, which is simply when you go back to those early child experiences, to use tapping to heal the wounds. And doing this in the partner's presence, as we saw with Jeremy and Melissa, cultivates empathy. It deepens the healing, having your partner there being part of the healing. Part of what's hard for couples is you care about each other, you love each other, you want to help each other, but you don't have the ways to do it in those times when you're really at odds with one another. So this gives a way that you really deepen the healing, and it establishes what couples need, which is a collaborative alliance that you can really count on. So the fifth skill is to really change lifelong patterns that trace to those old wounds. So even if you heal the wound, there still are patterns that get established in life in your relationships. You may be over pleasing people because it goes back to the parenting and how you had to survive in your family, but that pattern doesn't change just because you healed the initial experience. So you really have to pay attention then to what's going on in your life, and you can do the tapping as always to make the change, to really reinforce. You use things like the positive projection technique, where you imagine what you want and you really tap to get that image deeply embedded in your nervous system. The sixth is to complete other unfinished business. Most relationships have something from the past that hasn't been resolved, or something from a previous relationship that hasn't been resolved, that those creep into your current relationship. So you really are alert for those. And then the seventh is to establish a vision of how you want yourself in relationship to change, and to really install that vision. So you can do that by having the vision, or the way to get to that vision is to imagine your relationship is really happy, and from that imagination and that felt sense, let the vision come up, maybe surprise you. Once you have that vision, really begin to tap on that vision. It's like, embedding the affirmation. So those are the 7 skill sets for working with couples. And just really quickly to recap some of the main ideas, relationships are spawned by attraction, but they're shaped by conflict. So for me and Donna, one of our ongoing ones for 45 years is, I say the facts are the facts. Donna says, in a relationship, the feelings are the facts. I say the feelings just confuse the issue. She says, it's what you call the facts that confuse the issue. So, I mean, we're getting better at it, but that's still one that I come from the one place, she comes from the other. And in fact, you're often attracted to someone that's quite different from yourself. But it is these differences that can open you both to unimagined realms of possibility. One of the most popular chapters in the Energies of Love is called Sex is Nature's Energy Medicine for Couples. Now, conscious partnering is not a product, but it's a day-to-day process. It requires a willingness to set aside adolescent images of love and to embrace a much more complex, challenging, and ultimately fulfilling vision. The highest in each of you beckons you to find the highest in the other.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. Well, David, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to work with. And I hope the real empowering message here is that we have more power than we think. And that just because we might have a conflict doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to heal that. And that starts with doing this inner work and asking ourselves these questions. So thank you for leading the way and helping us do that. It was a real pleasure to hear this presentation. Thank you.